Let's talk about how executive functioning supports personalized learning. In a personalized learning environment, behavior is always a major concern. Since the role of the teacher shifts from providing whole group direct instruction, teachers must rely on students to self regulate behavior. It can be a lot like turning kids loose in a candy shop. In this video, we'll talk about the basics of personalized learning, then we'll dig deep into executive functioning skills and their relation to personalized learning. I went to my personalized learning coach to tell her personalized learning didn't work for me or my students. I was frustrated, and so were the students, and I wanted to go back to traditional teaching. She reassured me that many teachers experience similar feelings when beginning personalized learning. I explained that the students were often off task. I showed her some informal data, just tally marks on a sheet of paper, on how often I was prompting students to get back on task. She asked me if I had a classroom routine. I told her sure. Students come into the classroom. The list of students I was meeting with that day was on the board. Students took out the plan that we had created in their one-to-one conference, and they worked on their work while I met with students. She asked more questions that had nothing to do with the content my students were learning, but focused on routines and procedures. I really didn't understand how her questions would help me teach the content or help the students learn the content. Finally, she smiled at me and she said, "You're a good teacher and you have good students. The problem is that you and your students jumped into the deep end of the personalized learning pool without first learning to swim." Then she explained that executive functioning skills were the life buoy my students needed so they could learn to swim and so I wouldn't drown. Before I had decided to implement personalized learning in my classroom, I did some research. Boy, was that confusing. There were sources that said personalized learning was great and I should definitely implement it. And then there were resources that said personalized learning was a horrible idea and I shouldn't implement it. I was confused and worried that I would make the wrong decision. But when I went back and compared each side's arguments, I discovered that they were each making the same points. No matter the blog post or the research paper I read, all of them said that students needed to be more involved in their learning to develop ownership and agency. But nowhere did I read about executive functioning skills. I discovered that executive functioning is what makes all the conditions of personalized learning possible. After working with students and explicitly teaching some executive functioning strategies, I learned that these skill sets are needed so students can develop agency for their learning. Without effective executive functioning skills, personalized learning is too large a burden for an educator to lift by him or herself. I wanted to help my students be successful in my class and enjoy the benefits of a personalized learning environment. I did some research, but this time I focused on executive functioning. Based on the insights from my personalized learning coach and my research into executive functioning, I created a routine and taught it to my students. The first few days, I had to take them through it step by step. Then they got to the point where they could start the routine on their own. The next few days, I gave them prompts when I saw that they needed a little support. Eventually, the students followed the routine automatically and without my help. As time went on, I saw two things happen. First, students were more engaged in our one-to-one conferences. Second, bit by bit, I saw off-task behaviors decrease and a quicker recovery when students were distracted. Teaching an executive functioning strategy proved effective in our personalized learning environment, and students strengthened a dimension of executive functioning that would benefit them in all their future endeavors. Executive functioning is a complex cognitive process that enables learners to self-regulate. These processes include the ability to plan, focus attention, effectively recall information, control emotional responses, and organize tasks. I discovered that executive functioning is what makes all the conditions of personalized learning possible. After working with students and explicitly teaching some executive functioning strategies, I learned that these skill sets are needed so students can develop agency for their learning. Without effective executive functioning skills, personalized learning is too large a burden for an educator to lift by him or herself. Initially, I thought, shouldn't my students already know how to do all of these processes? Aren't these processes just a natural part of learning that students pick up along the way? How in the world was I supposed to teach executive functioning skills when I had all of this content to cover? But executive functioning is not something we are born with. We develop executive functioning skills through experience, observing peers, and explicit instruction of skills and strategies. In the introduction video of this cycle, I shared with you research showing how important executive functioning skills are for students in every aspect of their lives. Therefore, any time spent developing effective executive functioning skills is worth it. There is a lot writing on helping students improve their executive functioning that goes far beyond the classroom. Much to my surprise, I found that my students quickly adopted the new routine and used the skills I taught them automatically. Although I had to invest some time teaching the strategy, my students were working more efficiently than before, and I was redirecting off-task behavior only occasionally. It wasn't long before the time I spent teaching the strategy was made up and we were able to better follow the plans we created together.